Ever feel like you're just waiting around for your Oracle CPQ system to catch its breath?
Yeah, waiting for those spinning wheels to stop spinning.
Well, today we're going to dive into Oracle's Performance Best Practices document, a treasure chest of tips to make your CPQ experience faster and smoother.
It's like a secret stash of tuning tricks, right?
Exactly. We're here to help you decode them.
It's not just about making things fast for the sake of speed, though. It's about understanding how even small tweaks can really have a huge impact on the user experience.
Exactly. And this document dives into all sorts of optimizations, from those general performance boosters to very specific configuration settings.
What's really interesting is how much emphasis Oracle puts on the little things. For example, they actually suggest replacing this, and I'm going to try to say this right, dict string with dig string.
Okay, so full disclosure, I'm going to need some help understanding that one. So someone who's not exactly a coding whiz, that just looks like we're missing a character. Why is such a small change such a big deal?
Think of it this way. Every time CPQ has to, like, process or store data, it's kind of like it's carrying a backpack, right?
Okay,
The simpler the data structure is, the lighter that backpack becomes.
I like that analogy, yeah.
So that's like swapping out a heavy textbook for like a slim notebook in that backpack.
So in practical terms, if I've got a price rule that runs every time I add a product to a quote, and we're talking about a catalog of thousands of products, that tiny change in how CPQ stores the data, that could actually shave seconds off of each calculation.
You got it. Exactly. And those seconds add up,
Mhm.
especially when you're dealing with these large quotes or these really complex configurations. It's all about efficiency at scale.
That makes me think of all those times I've been guilty of like leaving in way too many print statements while I'm building out a configuration. Is that what they mean by minimizing print statements, and how much of a difference can that really make?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've all been there. Those print statements, those are like little breadcrumbs we're leaving behind during development, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And they're super helpful for debugging, but they can really add unnecessary weight to the system in a live environment.
So it's like leaving the scaffolding up after you've built the building. It's not really serving any purpose, and it's just getting in the way.
Exactly. Precisely. And speaking of streamlining things, the document also talks about minimizing loops, particularly those nested loops, which can really bog things down.
Okay, now, for those of us who aren't fluent in code speak, can you break down why too many loops are such a problem?
Imagine you're searching for a specific document in a filing cabinet,
Okay.
but instead of being organized, all the files are just thrown in there all haphazardly. Finding what you need is going to take forever. Loops, especially those nested ones, they can be like that disorganized filing cabinet.
So are you saying that every time CPQ hits a loop in the code, it's like having to search through that jumbled mess of files? And the more nested loops there are, the deeper and more disorganized that search becomes.
Exactly. Each loop adds processing time, and then when you start nesting them, you're really just adding layers of inefficiency on top of each other. Optimizing those loops, that's like creating this clear, indexed filing system so CPQ can find what it needs very quickly and efficiently.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to get a real feel for how important it is to write clean, efficient code for CPQ. Now, there's one piece of advice in this document that kind of threw me for a loop, pun intended. They actually advise against going overboard with Python and JavaScript within CPQ. Why is that? I mean, those are powerful languages, right?
Incredibly powerful and versatile, but here's the thing. CPQ has its own built-in scripting language that's specifically designed to work within the CPQ environment.
So it's like using a specialized tool that's really designed for a very specific job rather
Right.
than trying to force a more general purpose tool to do the same thing.
Exactly. While you can certainly use Python or JavaScript within CPQ, it oftentimes introduces this unnecessary complexity and can actually even lead to performance bottlenecks.
Yeah.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It might work, but it's not ideal.
So stick with the tools that are really designed to work seamlessly within the CPQ environment.
Got it. Now let's talk about a challenge that I know a lot of CPQ users face, and that's dealing with these large, really complex quotes. This is where performance becomes absolutely critical,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. When you're talking about quotes with hundreds or even thousands of line items, intricate configurations, complex pricing rules, even the smallest hiccups in performance, those really get amplified.
Yeah.
It's like trying to drive a race car on a bumpy dirt road.
So how do we go from bumpy dirt road to like Formula One racetrack when it comes to handling these, what do we call them, quote, Zilla scenarios?
Well, the document dives into some really clever strategies, and
Yeah.
I think a recurring theme here is minimizing these unnecessary calculations.
One specific example is the recommendation to eliminate revert to default actions on line items whenever possible.
Okay, break that down for me a little bit. What's the performance hit from something like revert to default? I mean, it seems like a pretty standard feature.
It is. But here's the thing. Every time that revert to default is triggered, it can kind of set off this chain reaction of calculations throughout the entire quote. Even if some of those calculations ultimately result in no change, CPQ still has to, like, churn through them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So it's like hitting the refresh button on a complex spreadsheet. Even if nothing's changed, it still takes time for everything to recalculate. And with a massive quote, those seconds can really add up. What else can we do to kind of streamline things?
Well, the document also talks about strategically using what's called temporary variables,
Okay.
especially when you're dealing with data that needs to be accessed again and again.
Okay, I have to admit, whenever I hear the word variables, my eyes start to glaze over a little bit. Can you maybe explain it in a way that even a non-programmer like me can grasp?
Sure. Imagine you're putting together this giant jigsaw puzzle,
Okay, yeah.
and you constantly need the same, like, few puzzle pieces to make all the connections, right?
Yay.
Instead of digging through that entire box every single time, what if you could keep those key pieces just like right next to you?
Oh, that would definitely speed things up. So are temporary variables like those easily accessible puzzle pieces for CPQ?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they basically provide a way to store that frequently accessed data in a very readily available location
Yeah.
so that CPQ doesn't have to waste time searching for it over and over again.
Okay. Okay, that makes perfect sense. So we're minimizing those unnecessary actions. We're strategically storing data. What other treasures are buried in this document when it comes to taming these large quotes?
Well, there's a whole section on optimizing what's called advanced modify code, which is this really powerful tool for customizing how CPQ behaves. But it can also introduce performance bottlenecks if it's not used carefully.
So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Powerful, but potentially dangerous if not handled properly.
Exactly. The document actually provides a lot of really specific guidance on how to write really clean, efficient, advanced modify code, like, for example, avoiding unnecessary dateful calls and using the right data structures for the task at hand.
Got it. Efficiency is key. Now, I know that CPQ relies very heavily on what are called data tables to store and retrieve all sorts of information. Is that what they mean by being mindful of data table calls, and how can we make sure that those calls aren't slowing things down?
You're exactly right. Data tables are absolutely essential, but accessing them can be really time-consuming, especially when you're dealing with these large tables. You know, it's kind of like searching for a needle in a haystack, right?
Right.
The bigger that haystack is, the longer it's going to take.
Yeah, makes sense.
The document really emphasizes minimizing the number of times CPQ actually needs to query those tables.
So are there any specific techniques for like reducing those data table queries? I mean, we can't just avoid using data tables altogether, can we?
Absolutely not, no. But we can definitely be smarter about how we use them.
Hmm.
For example, instead of making multiple calls to the same table to retrieve different pieces of information, we can try to kind of grab everything we need in a single call.
Okay, so it's all about bundling up those requests, making sure that
Exactly.
we're not making CPQ work any harder than it has to.
Mhm.
Okay, what about those, what are they called? RTE fields, the rich text editor fields that we use for things like, product descriptions. And those can get pretty content heavy, right?
They can. And all that formatting, all that embodied content, that can add some extra weight to a quote. The document actually suggests minimizing the use of RTE fields whenever possible, especially in those line items where they might be repeated many times.
So maybe use a simple text field if all you need is that basic information, and then reserve the RTE fields for those situations where you really need that rich formatting.
Okay, I'm really starting to appreciate how all these little optimizations can add up, but we've covered a lot here. Is there anything else we should keep in mind when it comes to supercharging performance, particularly for these large, complex quotes?
Yeah, I think there's one more gem that's kind of hidden in this document that I think is really worth highlighting,
Okay.
and that's desktop transaction caching.
Okay, now whenever I hear caching, I always think of like squirrels stashing nuts for the winter. Is that remotely close in the world of CPQ?
It's not that far off. Desktop transaction caching, it's all about storing that frequently accessed data in a super readily available location
Yeah.
right there on the user's computer.
Okay.
So CPQ doesn't have to go searching for it every time. It's like having this mini database right there on your desktop. So it's like, having that secret stash of information that we use all the time. So CPQ doesn't have to keep going back to the main database for every little thing.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. Means faster loading times, smoother editing, just an overall snappier experience, especially for those users that are constantly jumping in and out of quotes or working with, large data sets.
Yeah, that sounds like a major win, especially for those of us who are always battling against the clock.
Yeah.
Now, I know that CPQ can handle a ton of data, but even the most powerful systems have their limits, right?
Hmm.
What about like optimizing the amount of data that's being thrown around? Is that what the document means by optimized data request size?
Mm. You're absolutely right. It's all about like finding that sweet spot between delivering this super rich user experience and then like, being mindful of how much data we're actually pushing around.
Hmm.
So how does CPQ actually go about optimizing these data requests? Well, the good news is it's mostly handled behind the scenes. CPQ is really designed to only send the information that's absolutely essential for what the user is doing at that particular moment.
Yeah.
Imagine if you were like, ordering takeout. You wouldn't expect the restaurant to send you their entire menu, would you?
Right, right.
You just want to see those options that are relevant to your order.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's what CPQ does.
So CPQ is like, okay, here's your appetizer menu for this specific configuration. Let me know when you're ready for the main course.
Exactly. If an attribute's hidden, or maybe the user doesn't have permission to even see it, CPQ won't even bother sending it to the browser. It's all about streamlining that data flow, making it as efficient as possible.
Okay. Yeah. That's super smart. Now, let's talk about line items for a second. We know that scrolling through like pages and pages of line items, especially in these really large quotes, that can be a real drag on performance. So what can we do about that?
Well, that's where what's called line item grid pagination modes come into play. So instead of like loading all those line items at once, right, CPQ can actually be configured to load them in these more bite-sized chunks as the user scrolls.
Yeah.
Think of it like scrolling through your social media feed, right?
Okay, yeah.
You only see a few posts at a time, and then the rest kind of load as you go.
So instead of CPQ hitting us with this wall of line items, it's more like the smooth, continuous feed.
Exactly.
Okay, I like it. So tell me a little bit about, these different pagination modes. What are our options there?
Sure. So you can go with what's called preloading, where all the pages of those line items, they're kind of loaded in the background when that quote's opened.
Okay.
Might take a little bit longer up front, but then you get this really lightning fast scrolling experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for those users who, they know they're going to be digging into those line items and they want
Right.
the smoothest possible experience. But what if, like, minimizing that initial load time is our top priority?
Right. That's where the on-demand mode really comes in handy. So CPQ only retrieves that first page of line items just to start, and then it kind of grabs more as the user scrolls down as they need them.
So it's all about striking that balance between, speed and efficiency and really being thoughtful about how our users are actually interacting with the system. This has been an awesome, awesome deep dive. But before we wrap up, I know you mentioned earlier that there are even more specialized optimizations that are covered in this document. Anything else that kind of jumped out at you?
One thing that I thought was really interesting is we all know that like printing those monster quotes, it can sometimes feel like we're asking CPQ to run a marathon.
Right.
But Oracle has put a lot of thought into actually optimizing print performance as well.
Oh, interesting.
So like instead of regenerating the entire document from scratch every time there's a change, CPQ only updates the parts that are actually affected.
It's like using track changes in a document rather than printing out a whole new copy every time you make an edit.
Exactly.
So much faster, so much more efficient.
And they've also made some really significant strides in areas like, single sign-on performance and how CPQ handles read-only fields, always with this eye toward, like, squeezing out every little bit of performance that they can.
Yeah, I'm always so impressed by how much attention to detail goes into a lot of these optimizations. It really is like, fine-tuning this high-performance engine.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
this performance best practices document, it really is like having that mechanic's handbook right there at your fingertips.
I like that. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. Pick just one or two of the tips that we've discussed today and go give them a try in your own CPQ environment. You might be surprised at what a difference even just a small change can make.
I totally agree. And remember, optimizing CPQ, it's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing. As your business needs evolve in that CPQ environment of yours, as it grows, there's always going to be opportunities to kind of, fine-tune and improve performance along the way.
Well said. Until next time, happy optimizing.